The Shooting Range. In this episode, Pages of History, Grant's victory over General Lee, Map Guide, Tactics on the Jungle Map, and Metal Beasts, a curious French hybrid. Today, we're going to tell you about an unusual premium tank that was created by taking the turret from an American M24 Chaffee light tank and installing it onto the chassis of the French AMX-13. You can find this curious hybrid in the French tech tree at BR 3.3. Its main weapon is the 75mm M6 gun with elevation angles between -10 and +15 degrees. Additionally, the tank has two machine guns, one coaxial and the other one mounted on the roof of the turret. The ammunition rack is divided into three groups. The engine compartment is in the front part of the hull next to the driver. Other crew members sit in the turret. Since this tank is a light one, there isn't much to say about its armor. It can barely protect against machine guns and autocannons at a long distance. As for weaponry, though, the tank has some M61 APC-BC rounds with 65 grams of explosives and penetration rate exceeding 100 millimeters. These rounds are good enough to fight medium tanks. However, any enemy with heavy armor will become a problem for this French tank. Even more so, because when the engineers took the turret from the M24, they left the stabilizer behind. But on the plus side, the hybrid has a good power-to-weight ratio, which improves the dynamics. With such a battle performance, this tank is a classic flank attack machine for fighting in the second line. Its main advantages are mobility, a good gun, and powerful optics useful for scouting. In the beginning of the battle, try to find an approach to attack your enemy from the side. If a head-on fight is inevitable and your enemy's armor is too thick, you need to improvise. For instance, you can use your smoke launchers and then surprise your enemy by changing your course and getting into the flank. When the flanks are clear, you can switch your focus to the main direction of your team's offensive actions. Use your powerful APC-BC rounds to give your unsuspecting enemies a nasty surprise. And don't forget about active scouting. Marking an enemy in time may save your ally and bring your team closer to victory. The beginning of World War II was a hard time for British tankers. When France became occupied, their tanks were left behind on the continent. So Great Britain urgently needed to build replacements and in huge numbers. Local factories couldn't handle the task alone, so they had an idea to ask the US for help. The Americans hadn't entered the war at this point, and thus had a lot of manufacturing capabilities at their disposal. The Brits wanted to order some Matildas, the best thing they had at the moment. However, the Americans weren't impressed by the slow tank with a couple of diesel bus engines. At the time, they themselves were readying the M3 Lee medium tank for production, a machine with thinner armor than the Matilda, but better in pretty much everything else. Naturally, the British received an offer as well. And since the British Commission had little choice, they promptly agreed and started adapting the new tank for themselves. The original turret with a machine gun cupola felt too cramped and too inconvenient, so the engineers developed a new cast one and added a radio station in it. The new tank was cleverly named Grant, after General Grant, who, apart from other things, was famous for his victory over General Lee, the namesake for this American original. Shipping of the long-awaited Grants started in the late 1941, and just in time. Infantry tanks were too slow, cruiser tanks were too unreliable, while the new M3s turned out to be the best of both worlds. What the Army loved most in it was its armament. You see, the British had a peculiar approach to tank guns. The 2-pounders could only use solid shots, while the 3-inch howitzers, on the contrary, had no armor-piercing shells. Meanwhile, the Americans had both HE and AP shells for both guns. Moreover, a curious coincidence happened. In early 1942, the British captured some rounds for the 75mm Panzer IV gun. An Australian officer, Major Northey, noticed that German rounds fit into American cartridges. The tests were successful, so they soon retrofitted 17,000 more tank rounds, and the American engineers later used the German design to develop their own shells. Thanks to such ingenuity, the British tankers managed to win many battles, even though their machines weren't always the best. In the autumn of 1942, the new Shermans started replacing the Grants and the Lees as frontline machines. However, that didn't mean their career was over. These tanks were huge and made for great commanders' tanks. Even General Montgomery used one. Some were sent to Australia, where the Army gratefully accepted a replacement for the old Matildas. Grant and Lee tanks also won some battles in Burma against the Japanese. Ultimately, despite the old-fashioned looks and an inconvenient gun placement, the M3 Grant turned out to be a surprisingly good tank. It was used throughout the whole war, receiving an honorable place in the history of military vehicles. You guys just remember my name. In this episode, we will continue going through tactics on various game maps. Today, the highlight is the jungle map. We'll start with the team on the left. The key position for the left team is the hill in square C4. Choose the upper spawn point and make a beeline for it. The path is covered from enemy fire by a hill, so it's safe enough. When you're on the hill, pay attention to the enemy home point. There's a high chance the enemy has started capturing B, or will show up there in a matter of seconds. This is a good chance for you to increase your score by destroying some tanks. While your allies are taking other positions, you need to control the enemy home point and approaches to it, as well as to stop any enemy from getting to the center of the map. When your allies start capturing point B themselves, move to a position with a good view of the central point C to help your team gain a foothold there. The way to the next position starts with the upper spawn point as well. When you reach point A, you can capture that one or leave it to your allies and move on to save time. Your goal is to reach the green area in the center of the beach. By holding a position on the slope, you'll be able to control any approaches to your allies in square C4, or shoot anyone before the bridge that leads to the central point. And if you move a little to the left and higher towards the bunker, you'll have a good line of fire at point B. Another useful position is at the bottom of the map, square G3. When there, you'll have no problem covering your team going along the bottom road or shooting at enemy players around C and B. The last position worth mentioning for the left team is the central point itself. Don't rush to the top of the hill, though. You're very likely to expose yourself to enemy fire. Note how a part of the capture circle area touches the slope. Going there will provide you some safety even when taking over the zone. And if your gun's elevation angles allow for it, you'll even be able to control the center of the map without leaving point C. Now, what should the other team do? Some players need to drive towards point B from the closest spawn point right away. While some are capturing it, others can drive closer to the water towards the center of the beach to prevent the enemy from spreading after capturing A. Another important position is in square D5. Standing near the bunker will give you a good shot at C, and you'll easily destroy any enemy that took the hilltop. You can also control point A and the slope up the beach area. Your next move might be going towards the center of the map and taking the hill in square C4. If you need to cover allies in the bottom part of the map, take a hill between squares F5 and G5. That position will allow you to cover anyone at point C, as well as prevent the enemy from getting a good shot at C4. Just make sure your elevation angles give you a comfortable shot. Finally, the last useful position for the right team is point C itself. Your actions here are much like the other teams. You can capture it from the safety of the slope, but the steeper angle on this side won't give you a chance to shoot at the enemy. That's why, given the chance, you need to move to the other side of the circle and hide behind the boulder. This way, you'll still hold the center while controlling approaches to your position. Well, that looks like that's everything we wanted to tell you about the tactics on the jungle map. It's time for us to wipe off the sweat, swat the mosquitoes, and get down to answering your questions. The first question was sent by a player called Demon Blood. What would be the best way to use the Churchill Mark 7? Hi there, Demon. The highlight of this tank is its thick armor, especially when you angle your machine well. With good protection, however, comes reduced mobility. So your best tactic in a battle is to go to the central point using the shortest way. Push your enemies out of strategic positions and take some punches if needed. This will help your allies with less armor move ahead. Simon asks, the F-82E is really weird aircraft. Why is there two pilots? What is doing the other one? Do they work together to pilot this aircraft? The Twin Mustang is an unusual aircraft indeed. Its development began when pilots of single-seat fighters in the Pacific started getting exhausted from all the flying they had to do. Since the distances were enormous, that's why they decided to create the two-seat machine where any pilot could control it. In War Thunder, that translates into increased survivability. Even if you lose one of the pilots, you still have another one to continue the battle. Another question comes from Mark Maben. What is the best way to use heavy bombers in tank realistic battles? Greetings, Mark. Heavy bombers aren't meant for destroying individual tanks. They're meant for destroying strategic objects behind enemy lines. If you still want to join a mixed battle in a heavy bomber, you'll need to know the map well. To achieve maximum efficiency, drop your bombs into crowded areas, like a point being captured by the enemy. And always keep in mind that a large and slow bomber flying close to the ground is an easy prey for both anti-aircraft guns and tanks alike. Piotr Rostzivil writes, "What tips and tricks would you give to someone who's just entered the 5th tier?" Hello, Piotr. Rank 5 is where early jets come into play, and piloting them is significantly different from piston-engine aircraft. After takeoff, you need to first gain speed without gaining altitude. Only after you reach 500 to 600 kilometers per hour, you're okay to start climbing. But even then, the angles shouldn't be too steep. 10 to 15 degrees is enough. Early jets do have poor dynamics, so keep your speed high in a dogfight to be able to outrun your enemy in case you need it. As for the ground tech trees, Rank 5 has some early MBTs. These machines only have medium or light armor, but compensate for it with good mobility and powerful guns. Use their high speed, take strategic points first, and destroy careless enemies. Keep in mind, though, that you shouldn't trust your armor. There's no shame in retreat. And the last question today was written by Alvin the Coneman. Can you talk about the new F-11F1? Hi, Alvin. Of course we can. The F-11F1 is a very interesting machine. See it soon on the shooting range. Once again, guys, that's it for the summer of 2020. You've been watching The Shooting Range by Gaijin Entertainment, and the next episode will premiere the following Saturday at 4 p.m. GMT or noon Eastern Time. Subscribe and click the bell if you don't want to miss our next videos, and you really don't want to miss them. Don't forget to leave a like, learn your favorite maps, and see you this autumn. This is Grant saying goodbye.